Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of ManchTalk. I'm Tammy Simmons, I'm your host, and I'm glad you've decided to join me and hear some things about Manchester. Just wanted to start off by thanking the aldermen this week who voted to institute the pilot program on the automated trash pickup here in Manchester. From what I understand, it'll be piloted in portions of 3 wards, and for those that supported it, I greatly appreciate it. I think it's a great idea, as we discussed last week, to reduce injuries to our workers and save us money in the long run. So, what's new at the State House, you wonder? State House? We're not even there in the summertime. How could there be something new going on there? Well, trust me, there's stuff going on at the State House. Let me back up a little. Back in June, legislators received an email that there was going to be new security protocols instituted that the Joint Facilities Committee voted on. They've decided that they're going to lock most of the doors to the State House and the LOB. That is a strange thing, considering I don't ever recall hearing about any large, widespread threats, or, for that matter, any small threats. I generally feel really safe at the State House when I'm there. You know, people come and go as they please. It's a great place for people of New Hampshire and visitors. They can come and walk the halls and look at the paintings. They can sit in on any committee hearing going on at any time, and we even allow people to participate, where a lot of states, you know, you can't just go up and talk to your legislators in a committee if you're just some guy off the street. We're just the opposite. We're an open, transparent government with a true citizen legislature. I think it was a bad idea to limit access to either of those buildings for whatever security reasons. Quite honestly, the only time in all the years that I've been at the State House, the only 2 times I felt uncomfortable and slightly intimidated was before the right to work vote, when we were having committee hearings, when union members filed in behind our seats in the committee room, so they were like right behind us, hovering over our shoulders. That was a little unnerving. And then after the vote, I had voted for right to work 4 years ago, and as I was walking out, a Manchester firefighter reminded me that I should hope that my house never catches on fire. So that was the only time I ever felt uncomfortable at the State House. I think this is a big mistake. I think limiting access to the public, making it more difficult for legislators to come and go is a mistake. And that leads me to what brought me to this subject matter today, because if that happened in June, why am I talking about it in August? Well, yesterday, Americans for Prosperity had their pledge signing event in Concord. They've been doing this for two terms now. So they did it 2 years ago, and they did it 4 years ago. 4 years ago, Bill O'Brien was a speaker. 2 years ago, Democrat Terry Norelli was a speaker. In both instances, they used a legislative office, a committee room, to hold their event. Bill O'Brien had no problem with it, and at that time, Greg Moore, who's the current state chair of AFP, he was the chief of staff for Bill O'Brien. When Democrat Terry Norelli was there, she didn't have a problem with AFP having this event there. But yet, this year, AFP was denied access to the room. Greg Moore requested the room through Ken Weiler, who's the former finance chair. Ken Weiler requested the room and was originally told it wouldn't be available, something to do with the carpets. You know, they couldn't use it because of the carpets. But apparently there was meetings the day before and meetings the day after. So obviously it wasn't the carpets. And then eventually Speaker Jasper came out with a message that he didn't think it was appropriate that the AFP use the room because they advocate for or against policies that impact the State House or the State Senate. Well, welcome to politics, Sean. There are many groups that advocate for and against policies up in Concord, and you let other people use the State House. Perfect example. New Futures has a press conference coming up just in another week or 2, and they are an advocacy group. I don't necessarily disagree with what they're advocating for, but they're an advocacy group. One of the things that they do advocate for is they support permanent Medicaid expansion, which is kind of interesting because AFP clearly says they oppose all forms of Obamacare in New Hampshire, including Medicaid expansion. So kind of makes me wonder, Is this about security? Is this about keeping everybody out of the state house? Or is this just about Sean Jasper's primary in Hudson? Because, Sean Jasper might not be really popular with Republicans this year. He was elected by the Democrats in the state house and a small number of Republicans, and it has not been a good 2 years for Republicans. The most egregious thing that we did was we passed Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire. That put 50,000 able-bodied, non-child, above the poverty adults on free health care. We added 50,000 people to the free health care rolls. That means you and I are paying for them. That's just not a Republican principle. It's not something that's going to help New Hampshire. And Sean Jasper, as Speaker of the House, did absolutely nothing to stop this. In fact, his leadership team openly worked in favor of Medicaid expansion. Now, conservative Republicans are opposed to this. They're opposed to Sean Jasper returning to the state house. There are 17 candidates in Hudson running for 11 seats, and I have to believe that shutting AFP down for an event that they've had there two terms in a row has to be personal. I've held back on saying too much about it because you know what? I'm in a primary myself. Myself and Dan Garthwaite are running for a primary in Ward 10 and District 17 here in Hillsborough County. I don't need the speaker or his cronies coming out and attacking me and trying to get me removed from office. But enough is enough. Medicaid expansion is not a Republican principle. It just isn't. You worked against your own party by helping get this passed. Now the roosters have come home to roost, as they say. It hurts when you make bad votes. Organizations like AFP that support conservative principles, they're going to tell your constituents how you voted. They're out there telling people about people who voted for Medicaid expansion, and they're telling about people who voted against right to work. Two things that are critical to New Hampshire's economy and New Hampshire moving forward. So all of this in the name of security, all of this in the name of some unknown threats, that's a sham. This is about politics, true and true. This is about trying to shut down the message of people who maybe oppose you, and shame on you. So enough with that rant, on to something a little more positive. Joining me today is Jim Adams. Jim is a longtime friend of mine, and he is running for executive council here in New Hampshire, and I'm glad that you could join me today.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Before we start talking about you, I'm going to ask the question that I bet most voters say. What is the executive council, and what do they do?
Well, we have a perfect example which is unfolding in the press today and has been for about 5 or 6 days, and that is the Liquor Commission and the trail of lawsuits around the warehouse bid process, the RFP, and another leg of that is a contract that was let by the Attorney General's office to an outside attorney. And everything must come before the Executive Council, every personal contract $10,000 or more, and any business contract $25,000 or more. So obviously they put this contract at $10,000. In fact, some people are jokingly call him the $1 million man, Mr. Attorney Judge. In fact, here he's from Manchester. And he bid this $10,000 contract to take care of monitoring the bid process for the RFP for the warehouses, for the Liquor Commission. 2 months later, his first invoice was for $40,000. That's already blown through.
Well, that's even more than the $25,000 that a business would need.
Exactly. So someone on the governor's staff, someone should have said, hey, we've got to take this thing before the Executive Council. Even though some of the horses were out of the barn, there was a time to do it. No one did anything. And as of today, that $10,000 personal contract is costing the state of New Hampshire $1.1 million, and the meter is still running.
And this is just for an attorney?
This is for an attorney to monitor and oversee what's going on with this debacle that is now in the public sector. The bid process that was seemed to be very full of I guess
Holes.
we'll call it unethical steps here.
There was questions there.
A lot of questions. So I guess that is a prime example of what the council does, because if that's going to go through the executive council, then the question and answer period would be, well, this is a very large $200 million contract. Do you think you can do this for $10,000?
Right.
And then it probably, well, it'll be this XY plus cost. And then the executive council, all 5 members would have had a chance to, this would have been vetted, and I would probably think it would have probably not passed. If I were on the council, I would say, no, this dog don't hunt, because you've got far too much of a universe you need to take care of for that small amount of money.
Right.
And so that, in a snapshot, that is what the executive council does. All of these things that come, every judge, every commissioner, every director that goes through the state of New Hampshire has to pass through the executive council. And the part of that that is most important, in my opinion, is that the councilors get to vet these folks.
Mm-hmm.
If the governor is vetting a judicial individual to be a judge at either one of the courts, then I would ask him what they feel about the New Hampshire Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel it like the beautiful place we live, it's solid as granite, or do you feel that it's open for your interpretation? If they say, well, I think it's my job to interpret it, I will not vote for them, because our forefathers had such wisdom and foresight to put this Constitution together. It is, except for a few judicial missteps, in my opinion, it has stood the test of time. And I think that those things are very important, because all of the people that are in these positions today have been appointed by Democratic governors over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see the fallout from that now.
Yeah.
So it is terribly important. And if I am elected to District 4, Executive Council, I will represent 250,000 people, not special interests.
Good for you. Yeah, so basically, it sounds like the executive council, you're like the check and balance to the powers that a governor might have in another state. So instead of being able to make political appointments, putting your friends in positions, right. I'll make you the commissioner of whatever organization, right. Or I'll make you a judge because, you helped me out. The executive council, in theory, would be able to vet those people on behalf of the people of New Hampshire.
Exactly. The state is divided into 5 equal portions of 250,000 voters. Mm-hmm. And it is my opinion that each executive council member represents all those people, yep. Not a friend, not a right. political crony. And those are the things that I would make sure that we have everything in the sunlight, and that there is no, well, you would help me and I'll help you.
Right.
Because that is not a prudent way to conduct the people's business, and I would not do that.
So now the seat that you're going at for is the one currently held by Chris Pappas, correct?
Yes.
And it was previously held by Ray Wazorek, correct?
Yes.
And I understand Ray Wazorek is supporting you.
He's my co-chair.
That's
and
awesome.
Just last week I had a wonderful endorsement from Ray and a former Air Force Colonel, Leo Thorsness, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, 6.5-year prisoner of war. And the nice things he said about me, I've never been so humbled, but I appreciate it very, very much that they understand that I will do the people's business. And for every tax dollar spent, under my watch, the taxpayer will get $1 worth of value.
That's really important, because I do hear that, for so long I used to just say, well, we just want to cut spending, which, don't get me wrong, I want to cut spending.
Right.
But people are less concerned about how much they pay in taxes towards spending and more about what they're getting for that money.
Right. If
somebody has to pay $5,000 a year in property taxes, they want to make sure they're getting $5,000 worth of value. They don't want $3,000 worth of value for $5,000.
Exactly.
They want to go for the full bang for their buck.
Well, and I think elected officials for the last probably 3 or 4 cycles have said this often, and people say, well, here it goes again. I firmly believe that this is one of the most important elections we will ever have. As Yogi Berra used to say, we're at a fork in the road. If the voters decide to go left, they get the liberal social mm-hmm. agenda, which is everything for everybody, yep. with no concept how to
yep.
pay for it. I believe if they go to the right, they get a realistic Republican principle of low taxes,
yep.
low spending, small government, but at the same time, not leaving those most vulnerable in our society behind.
Yep.
And at the same time, keeping in mind that government cannot grow faster than the people's ability to pay for it.
I couldn't agree more. You know, if you don't know, I'm the big advocate of limiting growth to the rate of inflation. We have a spending cap in Manchester that I spent years working on with Mike Miondo, and it took us years to get it even on a ballot. And then, because the same thing, we have people don't want to hear from what the people have to say.
Exactly.
And then when we finally did get it on the ballot, and subsequently every time it's been voted on since it's been passed. So, you know, that's like a soft spot for me.
There you go. And then these are the things that come before the council. So many things that people would say, well, you know, what has that got to do with the overall spending in the state of New Hampshire? And my last life, when I left the Navy, I was in the Navy at 18 years old. I dealt in the human wreckage of war. I'm a Vietnam veteran. And when I got out of the Navy, I went to work for the Postal Service. Mm-hmm. And for 10 years, I carried mail right here in Manchester, and I have a real soft spot in my heart for Manchester because the people are great. And I carried mail, and while I was doing that, I went to college nights to get my degree. Once I had done that, I then started through the supervisory ranks and became the first person in the history of the Postal Service to go from a letter carrier in Manchester to chief of staff for 3 postmaster generals.
That's awesome.
850,000 employees, $71 billion a year budget, and we had to make some very big cuts to get that big gorilla back in the box. And we did so by reducing redundant, unnecessary overhead, high-paying positions.
Yep.
We took out 40,000 people who were just there because they had friends, as you mentioned, they were a friend of a friend of a friend. We did that, and for 9 years that I was down there, we retired a $13 billion debt. And we gave the ratepayers, we saved them $14 billion through cost-saving efforts, as I mentioned, reducing these positions. And a lot of people come to me and say, well, you're nothing but a postal worker, and the post office stinks, so why would we think you know anything about it? Well, I explained to them that the Postal Service and Social Security have the same problem. They've got Congress that's constantly reaching into their pocket. And when I give this number, people are astonished. But from 1973 until 2007, the federal government, through I guess we'll call it clerical errors and getting more than they should have taken $170 billion out of the Postal Service. And that's your money, because when you buy a stamp, that's where they get their money.
Right.
And the federal government sees that $70 billion every year. Whoa, let's take some of that. And that's why they're in the shape they are. The difference between Social Security and the Postal Service is the Social Security's got a piggy bank full of IOUs, and the Postal Service is actually having to write the check every month.
Right.
So that's how they are where they are. But I was proud of working with those folks. And in spite of all of this money that's being taken from the Postal Service, they still get the job done pretty well every
So it
day.
seems like you've got a good background to be in a position to do the vetting that the executive counselors have to do. I mean, giant contracts are above your pay grade, so to speak.
Exactly.
You know, it's not something you're on. Like if I were an executive counsel, that would be a little much for me. You know, there's a reason I don't sign up to be on the finance committee in the State House, because it's a little overwhelming, all those, you know, if that's not something you're familiar with. I'm good with numbers, but I don't know the minutia of it all. And it sounds like you have some experience in government, big numbers on top of it all. So that sounds awesome.
I have 27 years of executive experience, and I learned from some of the best as far as cutting costs. And this $200 million contract that was let by the Liquor Commission, those types, we had a $500 million contract come before us while I was there, and it was for automation to make us more efficient. And the people that I worked with showed me the fact that most of those contracts that size have a 2 to 5% fudge factor, where they build a little bit here, a little bit there. And on a $200 million contract, that's a lot of money. That's taxpayers' money. And once again, I want to make sure that the taxpayers get the best bang for their buck. And because it's just it's counterintuitive to have people say, well, it's free money. It's not costing. Well, they don't understand that all their tax dollars, some of that come back to New Hampshire if we're lucky.
Right. So on the executive council thing, just because this is a hot button thing, Had you been an executive counselor this year, would you have voted to give Planned Parenthood money?
Absolutely not. For two big reasons. First of all, I do not believe that taxpayers' money should be utilized for abortions. And if we just, as you mentioned earlier in your comments, if we had just opened up or brought in 50,000 more people to be on Medicaid, what do they get
Right.
from Planned Parenthood that they
can't get
don't?
That's what I
Exactly.
keep saying. I'm like, I don't understand. If we roll back the clock and go back 5 years, at least I could understand the argument for why people feel we need to fund Planned Parenthood for, birth control and all this stuff for low-income people. Right. Okay, let's presume that's the case. If everybody's required to have insurance, because that's what Obamacare said, everybody must have insurance. If everybody must have insurance, and we've got this huge Medicaid roll that has all the people that supposedly can't afford their own insurance, even though I would have been eligible under Medicaid expansion. Me, I could go right now and get free health care, free. But I'm not going to do that. But I definitely, with my income level and my employment level right now, I could totally have you pay for my health insurance. There's something wrong there when I'm having you pay for my health insurance. I'm a big girl. I can take care of myself. But if everybody has to have health insurance and we've got these huge Medicaid rolls, what are we paying for? Because birth control is covered under your health insurance.
Exactly.
So there's something not right there.
Well, and
I agree with you. I don't think any taxpayer dollars should be spent on entities that are providing abortions. Regardless of whether I'm pro-life or pro-choice, I happen to be pro-life, but regardless, it's just not appropriate use of taxpayer dollars.
Exactly, and I agree completely, especially when you look at their filings. They have $20 million. They spend $1 million a year on lobbying.
Yeah.
Who do they lobby? And another $200,000 in contributions.
Yep.
That's, I think, once again, that flies in the face of open
Yep.
government. And I've just, as an aside to this, I talked to 5 former executive counselors who go back nearly to the 60s. And in their tenure, never has an item that has been voted down in the 2-year
Yep.
cycle of the budget ever been brought back to be voted on again. It's just, this stinks
relentless.
to high heaven of nothing but politics.
Yeah, that's not what it's all about.
Exactly.
So, you're running for executive council.
Yes.
What's the range of, you don't have to list off all the towns, but I know it's Manchester, but...
Well, we go in east, we have Londonderry, and we go all the way over to Barrington and Lee.
Okay.
And to the west, we have Bedford, Goffstown, and then we swing down into Bow, and it goes all the way to the north to Loudon and Pittsfield.
Okay, so that's a good area.
It's a good spread.
People can get more information about you at jimadams.org?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm going to wrap up with some other tidbits, and I really appreciate you having here, and everybody give this man consideration and vote for him in September.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We were talking about important things. As I've said time and time again, this is the year that we must elect a Republican governor. We must. There are four decent candidates out there. One of them has to be our next governor. But, since we were talking about people that I like, and, I like Jim and everything, I want to bring up something about Frank Edelblue. Everybody knows that I'm supporting Frank Edelblue for governor. I'll take any one of the 4 Republican candidates for governor. I'll be happy with any of them. I just happen to align politically more with Frank. Frank and I think much more similarly than I do with the other candidates. Yesterday at the AFP event, apparently only 2 Republicans have signed the AFP pledge. I have my AFP pledge right here. It's not that complicated. You're agreeing to work to cut taxes and fees and oppose any tax increase, to cut spending in the size of government, to pass a right-to-work law in New Hampshire, to oppose all forms of Obamacare in New Hampshire, including Medicaid expansion, and to uphold both the New Hampshire and the United States Constitution. That seems pretty easy. That's not off in the weeds. That's all pretty basic stuff. Only 2 of the Republican gubernatorial candidates have signed the pledge, Jeannie Forrester and Frank Edelblue. Frank Edelblue also this week was endorsed by 57 state representatives, current state representatives. That's 25% of the Republican caucus all are supporting Frank Edelblue. That's a lot of people. I'm one of them. I'm proud to be supporting Frank. I think he would be the best man for the job. Frank was also endorsed this week by the New Hampshire Right to Life PAC. He had previously been endorsed by the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. He's the only governor candidate to ever be endorsed by them. So he's off to a good start. You can get more information on Frank Edelblut at frankedelblut.com. That's EDELBLUT. Lastly, I'm going to do a shameless plug for myself. As I mentioned earlier, myself and Dan Garthwaite are running for state rep in Ward 10 here in Manchester. That's Hillsborough District 17. We would love to have your support. I would love to hear feedback from anybody who lives in my ward. You can send your comments to ManchTalk@gmail.com because I'll get those anyways. Or you could send them to my legislative email, which is reptammysimmons@gmail.com. You can get more information about me at tammysimmons.org. There's a nice handy little donate button there if you want to send me some money. Every dollar you send helps both me and Dan, so it's a twofer. But we're both excited and working hard to make it through the primary because we both believe that we are the best choice in Ward 10 to send 2 Republicans to the State House and not just one. We are running against current incumbent Tim Smith and former AFL-CIO President Mark McKenzie. So Dan and I can take both of them out. I am confident that Dan and I can beat them both in November. But we need your help in the primary. I need your vote in the primary. So if you live in Ward 10, Tammy Simmons, Dan Garthwaite, and you can find me at tammysimmons.org. That's all I have for this week. As I say every week, make sure you get outside, spend some time in Manchester. We've got a lot of beautiful parks, places to go and sit and relax. Go up to Hooksett, rent a kayak at Edgewater Kayak, and no, I don't get any money from them. I just think it's awesome. Take a walk on the bike path, ride a bike, whatever you got to do. Take your dog to the dog park on 2nd Street. Get out, enjoy the summer. It's August. We're going to run out of summer soon. If you have any feedback on the show, it's manchtalk@gmail.com. And as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And that's all I've got for this week. I'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.